To talk about this and much more regarding matters of the rule of law in the country, Ochil Dudley, who's a partner for Bond Advocates and is the current ICJ Kenya Jurist of the Year. Wanjiru Gikonyo is also joining us, an advocate for good governance and accountability. Dr. Eric Omolo, who's an advocate. Eric, I'll begin with you. Your response to his response today regarding this matter.
Yvonne, I know for a fact that the police service has very competent lawyers. In fact, nowadays they recruit advocates and train them as police officers, and it is expected that they will advise the leadership of the police service, including the commission itself, on how to handle relationship with the courts. Importantly, on how when summons against the IG have been issued by courts, then they ought to respond. So as a matter of fact, I'm disappointed that it has taken no less than 7 summons for the IG to comment. I hope that he will take necessary steps to reconcile with the court in a manner that it should be done. I don't expect this case to be the kind where we are gagged not to speak, because this is a very serious public interest case, and so I don't agree with him that the fact that the matter is before court is reason enough not to discuss it at this level or any other place. Importantly, I also hope that they will take immediate steps to kind of arrest what I'm gathering the judge pronounced himself about, an attempt to reach out officers guarding the judge, and importantly to try to influence the course of rule of law. That is essentially why we passed the 2010 Constitution, and we don't expect people who have monopoly of use of force in this country to try to abuse their power and try to influence judges.
Wanjiru, why is this a matter of public interest?
Well, first, as Mwalimu here has said, we are a constitutional democracy, and under that constitution, the police have a duty to uphold the rule of law and protect the public interest, including the human rights of all. And we have seen, I think the numbers are not that clear, at least 68 deaths at the hands of the police. There are bodies that have been found in mortuaries, unidentified, whose cause of death is not clear. There have been operations that have taken place in Githurai, in Rongai, in Karatina, and we are not sure whether these were massacres, because that's what is emerging. No report has been made by the police to Parliament or to the country about the conduct of the security officers in quelling what was a legitimate protest against poor governance. So what we are seeing really is an attempt by William Ruto and the DIG, who in this case is operating like a puppet of the executive. This is an attempt to subvert the constitution. When William Ruto said that the country, that he must protect the country, he overlooked the fact that the greatest existential threat to our constitutional order is himself and the actions of the security apparatus, because they have failed to respect key provisions of the Constitution and the lives of Kenyans. So we are really seeing a coup against the Constitution by our political leadership, and the DIG is really saying very contemptuously, mutadu, and so it's great that the court is standing firm. But it's a very disturbing time, because we are left wondering, if not the Constitution, what else? And so we've seen excessive use of force, really subversion of the law, by a police force that has not been reformed from its colonial state. We have reports that have been gathering dust. I think the most recent was was laid before Parliament in December. We have another report, IPOA produced a report for needed reforms for the independence of the police, for accountability in the policing and security sector. Yeah. So we are seeing an abject breakdown of law and order within the state.
Okay.
And so as citizens, what do we do? And then what do the officers under a DIG who can demonstrate such contempt, what conduct do we expect of a police force already that exercises excessive use of force? So it is very scary, and I think this posturing is intended to subvert citizens from exercising their rights and in demanding good governance.
Yeah, and let's understand this a little bit, because there's been quite some conversation about how we got to this point, even as we see what happens with the sentencing on Friday. Dudley, several times that the acting Inspector General of Police, Gilbert Masengeli, has been required and summoned before the court. He has either sent a legal representative or he's sent his deputy. He's a deputy IG himself, but is acting, as IG. So explain to us how a summons works. Is this something that, I mean, if I'm summoned to court, Dudley, can I have you go and represent me, for instance? How does it work?
Okay, so first of all, contempt of court proceedings are quasi-criminal, and the threshold of proof is quite high. That's why you heard the judge saying that he was going to wait and give the IG the many chances that he gave him, because he's now a convict. So it's personal proceedings. They're proceedings directed against the person who has disobeyed the court order. It's called the contemner. So the convict is now a contemner. And I find something quite ironical in his speech today. You know, contempt of court also extends to sub judice. You do not speak about matters in court because of the sub judice rule, which is, and if you do, you're in contempt of court. So for him to, pretend like he cares about the dignity or authority of the court by not speaking about matters in court when he is a fugitive from the law, is a convict, awaiting his mitigation and sentencing. It's quite ironical. But allow me to bring in the Attorney General here, Dorcas Oduor, Senior Counsel, reached the rank of Senior Counsel because of her knowledge and expertise and her competence and her professionalism. This convict is her client in court. Why is she not advising this convict that court processes are not to be joked with, that court proceedings must be respected? And Masengeli might think that he's mighty, but is he mightier than Jacob Zuma, the former president of South Africa, who was sentenced to 15 months in prison for contempt of court and served 2 months? He was saved on appeal. Is he mightier than Matiang'i, who was saved by the Court of Appeal? And the other irony is, once the court slams its foot down, Masengeli will run to the Court of Appeal, and he cannot respect court orders. But I think that he's going to run out of options, and he's going to find out really soon who between him and the Constitution is mighty. But to answer your question, to get back to it, contempt proceedings are personal. It is a contemner who comes before the court in person and purges the contempt. And let us remember that this is about the disappearance of Aslam Longton, Jamal Longton, and Bob Njagi. There are 3 Kenyans whose whereabouts we do not know. So he's disobeying the court in a really unfortunate matter.
So he has to show up
He must
personally.
Show. Yes.
Okay. And you've mentioned some interesting, examples of contempt of court that we have seen. Eric, one would assume that, well, contempt of court is a slap on the wrist. And I think, like Dudley says, suddenly, when there is a conviction of contempt, now people are available to go to court, to the Court of Appeal, to try and seek remedy and recourse there, which they didn't get at the lower court. But tell us, does this contempt of court mean anything in terms, of a conviction? To what extent does it stop this bad behavior? I mean, there's several government officials who've been held in contempt and I think still have that conviction hanging over their heads. it doesn't seem to have improved somewhat respect for the courts in the country.
Well, you know, there's a big governance problem that we are suffering from, shaped largely by our politics is ordered and how tribalistic it is, and obviously corruption in the entire political and public governance architecture. So that's a different thing. But there are also legal proceedings that, as Mr. Chela said, are personal to the people who are cited. In this case, Mr. Masengeli. And our law is fairly clear that once you have been a convict, then you do not qualify to hold certain positions in public office. More or less like impeachment, maybe impeachment a bit different in terms of the political process. But we've had contempt proceedings before. I mentioned earlier against, I believe, Mr. Matiang'i and the former director of immigration, if I'm not wrong, about Mr. Miguna's passports before. And in this particular case, I think they were fined. So there are several options available to the judge on Friday in terms of the sentence he can give. He can either jail him, I'm told, for about 6 months or so, or he can just fine him. Whatever it is, he is a convict. And once you're a convict, the only alternative you have is to serve the term that you've been sentenced or appeal. And obviously, from the look of things, he's beginning to realize, you can see the body language, he's beginning to realize that he might be in a very tight spot. And so I hope that...
Yeah, so tell me, now that he's been convicted of this, and he has this conviction hanging over his head, what does it mean for your career, for your job? Do you continue to serve in a position that you're in when you've been declared guilty of contempt of court? You know, and the right to appeal is, of course, granted to everybody under, you know, the law. But what are the consequences of a conviction such as this one?
In a country that has some semblance of value systems, he'll be out of office now.
Okay.
I'm not confident Kenya has some semblance of value systems. In fact, I think that in Kenya, we overemphasize the fact that you have the right to exhaust all appeals up to the Supreme Court, and that is normally used to, obviously, sabotage the entire system of rule of law. So yes, not only him, there are several people in this government, there are several people in public service that ordinarily would not get opportunity to serve in public service based on the cases and allegations that have been leveled against them. But we are in Kenya, Yvonne, and in Kenya, you know how people protect each other to get away with some of these things. But I think we should not get lost on the importance of what we are facing now. What we are facing now is testing the Constitution and rule of law, and the people, particularly in criminal justice system, the institution with authority to enforce after courts render their decision is the police, the civilian police. And so we are having a head of an institution that is charged with, importantly, enforcing court orders, being cited for contempt. So we are in a very, very unwelcoming situation, in my view, but importantly, something that I think, and I agree with Mr. Chel, I think the Attorney General should take the lead to encourage public officers like Mr. Masengeli to importantly follow the Constitution. And if they are unable to, I think the right thing is to leave.
Interesting. I want us to take a short break, but Wanjiru, look, what does this mean? Because that was the one thing, just, you know, in about a minute, that, you know, Eric has brought up. So you've got, you know, two important arms of this, you know, within the law space. One is an enforcer, and, you know, one is the one providing the orders. What does it mean when the judiciary and the police are in a situation such as this, where a judge is now finding, you know, the police, who ideally these two institutions should be working together, right? The judiciary and the police in terms of enforcing the law. But here we find them at odds with each other.
Yes, and indeed, I think that forms the genesis of a lot of the challenges we have in prosecuting crimes, and many of the, you know, many of the cases that do end up in court. And first of all, I think there is a question around the Public Officer Ethics Act. Once somebody is declared a convict, whether you can still hold office, and maybe the lawyers can advise on that, because my understanding is that he can't, and he may need to now fight beyond this outside of the public office. And then when you have this non-cooperation by the police, and in fact there is a parliamentary committee that's headed up by Gathoni Mushomba that has been looking at the conduct of the National Police with regard to how it engages IPOA and has engaged them around the disappearances, around the abductions, and the refusal to give evidence.
In fact, we had the commissioner right here on this set talking about the lack of cooperation from IPOA, talking about the lack of cooperation by the police.
Right, so that is really seeking to frustrate justice. And then just like has happened with Zuma and in South Africa, where the executive goes on the warpath against the judiciary because the judiciary is holding the executive to account. You're then saying that one of these is going to have to carry the day. And what the executive has been doing is the power of the purse and squeezing parliament to frustrate the judiciary. I think they're out of options. We are now in a different era with the Gen Z revolt, with the Gen Z revolution. There's really the issue of good governance has been put center stage. And we are all being called to account across all the sectors to really abide by the law. And in this case, it's unsettling for the country. But I do not see how he's going to win this one. And I do not see how far the executive is going to get, trying to pull the strings to get the police and the head of the IG or whoever is holding that position not to comply with court orders. So this is a battle, really, for the essence of who we are as a country and who we are moving forward.
Okay, all right. We will come back and talk a little bit more about this with what's happened there, but also with what's been happening with the courts and the executive, where we are and what that means for the state of democracy in this country. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with me for a moment. I'd like us to